Helen Keller was a child who lived in complete darkness and silence, yet she went on to become one of the most powerful voices in history. But how did someone who could neither see nor hear learn to speak, read, and write? This is not just a story about disability. This is a story about human will, patience, and the power of a teacher who refused to give up. Helen Keller was born in 1880 in Alabama, USA. For the first 19 months of her life, she was a normal, healthy baby. She could see, she could hear, and she was beginning to speak. But then something tragic happened. She fell seriously ill with a high fever. Doctors today believe it was either scarlet fever or meningitis. She survived the illness, but it left her completely blind and deaf. Imagine being a toddler and suddenly losing both sight and sound. The world went dark and silent overnight. Helen couldn't understand what was happening. She couldn't communicate her needs. She couldn't understand why people around her were moving their lips or reacting to sounds she could no longer perceive. As a result, she became extremely frustrated and angry. She threw tantrums, broke things, and often hurt people around her, not because she was bad, but because she was trapped in a world she couldn't understand. Her family loved her, but they didn't know how to help her. At that time, very few people believed that a deaf-blind child could be educated. Most thought Helen would remain wild and unteachable for life. But Helen's mother refused to accept that fate. When Helen was 6 years old, her parents contacted the Perkins School for the Blind. That decision changed history. The school sent a 20-year-old teacher named Anne Sullivan to teach Helen. Anne herself had suffered from severe vision problems as a child, so she understood pain and struggle deeply. From the very first day, Anne realized something important. Helen was intelligent. She wasn't broken. She just needed a way to connect language to the world. Anne began by spelling words into Helen's hand using finger movements, a method called fingerspelling. For example, she would place a doll in Helen's hand and spell D-O-L-L into her palm. But at first, it meant nothing to Helen. She memorized the finger movements like a game, without understanding that they represented words. Days passed, weeks passed, nothing clicked. Then came the moment that changed everything. One day, Anne took Helen to a water pump. She placed Helen's hand under flowing water. As the cool water rushed over her fingers, Anne spelled W-A-T-E-R into Helen's other hand, slowly, clearly, again and again. Suddenly, Helen froze. Something clicked in her mind. She realized that the finger movements in her hand were not just random signals, they were symbols for real things. The cold liquid flowing over her skin had a name: water. That single moment unlocked language. Helen later described it as her soul waking up. After that day, she became unstoppable. She wanted to know the name of everything. She touched objects and demanded their words: tree, flower, bread, mother, father, love. Within weeks, she learned hundreds of words. Within months, she could form complete sentences using fingerspelling. Her frustration turned into curiosity. Her anger turned into joy. But learning words was only the beginning. Next came reading. Helen learned to read using Braille, a system of raised dots that represent letters. She ran her fingers over the pages, slowly connecting patterns to language. Reading opened entire worlds to her, worlds she could not see or hear but could imagine. Then came the impossible challenge: learning to speak. Most deaf people who are born deaf struggle to speak clearly because they cannot hear sounds. Helen was both deaf and blind. Many experts believed speech was impossible for her, but Anne Sullivan believed otherwise. Helen was taught to speak by placing her fingers on her teacher's lips, throat, and face. She felt vibrations. She felt breath. She felt movement. She learned how sounds were formed, not by hearing them, but by feeling them. It took years of painful practice. Her speech was slow and difficult to understand at first. People often couldn't make out her words. But Helen refused to quit. Eventually, she learned to speak well enough to give public lectures. Yes, Helen Keller, a woman who could neither see nor hear, stood on stages around the world and spoke to audiences. She didn't stop there. Helen went to college. She attended Radcliffe College and graduated with honors in 1904, becoming the first deaf-blind person in history to earn a college degree. She wrote books. She wrote essays. She learned multiple languages. She traveled to over 35 countries. Helen Keller became an activist, fighting for disability rights, women's rights, workers' rights, and education. She worked with presidents. She inspired millions. People often ask, what was Helen Keller's greatest disability? Her answer was powerful. She said, the only true disability is a lack of imagination. Helen Keller proved that limitations do not define a person. Society's expectations do. With the right support, patience, and belief, even the impossible can become reality. Her story is not just about overcoming blindness and deafness. It's about the human spirit refusing to be silent, even when the world is. So here's a question for you. If Helen Keller could overcome darkness and silence, what excuses are we still holding on to today? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more videos.